continues to sort of infect the entire bioweapons program. Now, we put huge amounts of money into bioweapons. In 1969, we had nuclear equivalents. They were bragging that they could kill everybody, basically everybody in the world for 29 cents a person, 29 cents a death. This is what they were going for. That's success.
And welcome back to the homestead. Today, Doug's going to play devil's advocate. What if the pandemic was all about population control?
We've taken that chart that shows the global population growth, and we've actually extended it out all the way to 2100. And we can see that instead of continuing, it actually flattens out. Another way to see that is through this rate of population growth. And you can see that in the 60s, that reached a pretty high number, over 2% per year, and it's now come way, way down. What could cause an excess in a single year of 10 million deaths? Now, clearly a big war could, and a pandemic, natural or created by bioterror.
Le Croix has an article today about climate change and the role of families, the role that they play in that.
Exactly. Should we limit the world's population to save the planet? That's the headline this morning in La Croix. They are talking about how Emmanuel Macron is going to the climate summit today, and he'll be joined by other heads of state as well as thousands of activists. Now, the paper goes into how earlier this week, 15,000 scientists signed a petition calling for measures to help limit the world's population.
More importantly, why did I feel so paralyzed as I watched our planet decay? It occurred to me that all these problems are connected by one cause: overpopulation. To learn more about what will happen to our world and what overpopulation will cause, I'm not sure I want to have kids. In fact, I'm pretty sure I don't want any. But all of us combined can completely change the future of our planet. Having smaller families could take tons of pressure off our environment.
Population Commission was formed in 1946, in very early days of the United Nations, and the Population Division was created around the same time to support the work of the Commission.
If we recall that the very first session of the Commission on Population Development took place in 1947. Now it's a good 70 years has passed. We are marking the 70th year.
Dealing with these population issues was equal to dealing with development of the countries in the world. Dealing with population issues at the UN was extremely important in preparing our policies for the future. This is what UN does.
And prosperity of mankind for generations to come depend to a great extent on the success of our effort to solve the population problem before the end of the century.
I wrote a book about how the pandemic was misused and that it was not, the public health response was not about public health. It was a militarized and monetized response. It was a pretense for clamping down totalitarian controls. And the weird thing about the pandemic was this constant involvement by the CIA and by the intelligence agencies and by the military. When Operation Warp Speed made its presentation to FDA, to the committee they call the VRBPAC committee at FDA, VRBPAC asked for the organizational charts, which were classified up to that time. And when Warp Speed turned over the organizational charts, they shocked everybody because the top organization that had managed Warp Speed was not HHS, which is a public health agency. It wasn't CDC or NIH or FDA. It was the NSA, a spy agency. So that was the top. Agency, the lead agency on Operation Warp Speed and the pandemic was the NSA, and the second agency was the Pentagon. And when you start looking at, it turns out that, the vaccines were developed not by Moderna and Pfizer. They were developed by NIH. They're their own. The patents are owned 50% by NIH. Nor were they manufactured by Pfizer or by Moderna. They were manufactured by military contractors. And basically, Pfizer and Moderna were paid put their stamps on those vaccines as if they came from the pharmaceutical industry, but that's not what they were doing. They were coming from this was a military project from the beginning, and and then you have one of the things I detail in my book is these simulations that I uncovered of about 20 different simulations, coronavirus and pandemic simulations, that started in 2001, the first one right before the anthrax attacks, and then every year the CIA was doing these, and the CIA was sponsoring them all, and they were the last one was Event 201, which was in October of 2019, and the participants in there are Avril Haines, who was the former deputy director of the CIA, who has been managing cover-ups her entire life. She did the Guantanamo Bay and the spying on the Senate, and she's right. She is now the director, DNI, Director of National Intelligence, which makes her basically the highest-ranking officer at the NSA, which managed the pandemic. So you have a spy who is convening these pandemic simulations, and in each of these simulations going back 20 years, they're simulating a public health response. They're not doing the kind of things, how do we stockpile vitamin D? How do we get people outdoors, losing weight, doing exercise? How do we develop an information grid to all the 15 million doctors, frontline physicians all over the world? We're going to be encountering this disease so that we can get their information about what they're doing that works and what doesn't work, and put together a model of, okay, here are the drugs, the repurposed drugs that work, here are the treatments that work. How do you use the pandemic to clamp down censorship? How do you use it to, do forced lockdowns, which, by the way, the lockdowns, every pandemic preparedness document that had been adopted by the major public health agencies, whether it was CDC, WHO, the European Health Agency, the National Health Services in Britain, all of them said you don't do lockdowns. You quarantine the sick, you protect the vulnerable, and you let everybody else go back to work, because the lockdowns actually amplify the impacts of the disease. If you isolate people, it makes them more vulnerable. It makes breaks down their immune system. And if you lock them indoors, it's going to spread the respiratory virus. And so all the things they were doing that they were drilling were about clamping down totalitarian controls. And if you look at that Event 201, which is still on YouTube, you can still look it up and go to the fourth seminar that day. It's broken into 4 parts. And remember, the people who are here, who are they? Avril Haines, the CIA, DNI, Director of National Intelligence, who was the CIA Deputy Director. Former Bill Gates, a lot of Tony Fauci's people, the pharmaceutical industries, the big media, Bloomberg, et cetera, all the social media companies. And then somebody odd, who's George Gao, who's the director of the Chinese CDC. So this is in October of 2019.
So I would start by pursuing where trust exists in the ecosystem. Jane, in a prior meeting, mentioned that there's considerable trust by employees of their employer, and that's been borne out by our own trust barometer in the last several years, where it's extraordinary the amount of trust given to the employer. And coupled with that, in times of crisis, as we're living, the role of the CEO and the trust given to the CEO for advocacy and for advancement of accurate information is considerable.
Nobody knows about coronavirus there, and yet they're drilling a coronavirus epidemic, a world global coronavirus epidemic. Nobody's going to ever hear the word coronavirus. The Chinese first acknowledged it on January 1st, so 3 months later. We now know coronavirus was already circulating in Wuhan, and the Chinese knew about it at least by September 19th. So that's a month before that pandemic simulation. George Gao is the Chinese head of the CDC and the Chinese expert on coronavirus. So clearly he must have known. that coronavirus was circulating. On September 19th, a month before that simulation, the Chinese military kicked down the door of the Wuhan lab, went in and took all of the genomic sequences off of the public-facing websites and started destroying all of the links between the lab and the virus, and put a military General Wei, in charge of the lab. So they clearly knew that it had come from the lab and that it was already circulating, and it circulated out. We know down the subway line that leads to the airport, from the lab to the airport. So they knew it in October, and they had the simulation in New York. And people there, some of those people must have known it was already circulating. And what are they talking about? The fourth simulation that day. And you can go up on YouTube right now and look this up. They talk about how do we stop people from saying that this came from a lab leak. And the people who are leading that discussion are the CIA director, Avril Haines, and deputy director, and George Gao from the Chinese CDC. And Avril Haines says, essentially she's saying, George Gao is saying, we got to censor the social media. We got to stop them from saying it's a lab leak. Anybody who says that needs to be deplatformed.
But deplatforming works, and it is important. And there you go. Good things can happen.
This is 6 months before all this started happening. And then Avril Haines says, not only do we have to censor, but we need to flood the zone with authoritative voices who dismiss the idea that this was a lab leak. So they were, either they're incredible soothsayers, or or there's something weird going on with this, that they were doing it. And that isn't the first one. They were doing this again and again. They did it 6 months earlier, the same thing, another coronavirus epidemic. And I detail all of these in my book, and every one of them the CIA wrote the script for. The CIA was the biggest funder through USAID, about $64 million, and then the Pentagon was the second biggest. So it wasn't just Fauci, it was the whole U.S. intelligence military apparatus that was basically handing over cutting-edge military technology, bioweapons technology, to these Chinese scientists who were messing with it. It's really a strange thing. And then the intelligence officer shutting down the investigation, which Catherine Eben documents, but then Republicans in Congress, when Biden comes in, say, hey, you got to investigate this. You got to figure out, because there's some mounting evidence that it came from the Wuhan lab. So he says, okay, I'm going to do it. He says, I'm going to get all 22 U.S. intelligence agencies to get together and figure this out. And he said, and come back to me in 90 days. Who does he put in charge of it? Avril Haines. So she signed, then she comes with a thing that says, well, nobody knows, we'll never know. She comes with this report in August of 2021. Nobody knows, we're never going to be able to find out. The intelligence agencies say that we can't figure it out. And so it doesn't have good optics that the same person, and she continues to be the primary advisor to President Biden on coronavirus. I'm just finishing now this book on the Wuhan lab, and I had to kind of put together this history, which was fascinating because, why was the CIA so involved with gain of function and so obsessed with it? And I went back and kind of traced this history, which is the CIA was created in 1947. And the first task that it was given was Operation Paperclip, which had already been ongoing. The Joint Chiefs were already bringing it over, but that was bringing over all the Nazi weapons scientists, many of them who were destined for the gallows in Nuremberg. And the CIA created these rat lines to smuggle them out from under the nose of Nuremberg prosecutors and bring them over to Fort Detrick and to these weapons labs. A lot of them were nuke scientists, but a lot of them were bioweapons scientists, because Hitler and Goebbels Goering had a huge bioweapons program, and they'd done a lot of work on it. They had a lot of cutting edge stuff. At the same time, the biggest bioweapons program was in Japan, and it was managed by a scientist called Shiro Ishii, who was just this diabolical Mengele-like scientist who was doing human experiments that were, as bad as anything that the Nazis did. But he then was brought onto the U.S. wing and protected from the Russians who wanted to hang him. And they brought all those scientists over. It was called Japanese Paperclip. So in that program, they brought all the Japanese scientists. And those scientists who initiated the U.S. bioweapons program at its birth, not only imprinted it with a lot of their, cell cultures, et cetera, but also with a lot of their, I would say, ethical elasticity or ethical lacunae. So and that continues to, to sort of infect the entire bioweapons program. Now, we put huge amounts of money into bioweapons. In 1969, we had nuclear equivalents. They were bragging that they could kill everybody, basically everybody in the world for 29 cents a person, 29 cents a death. This is what they were going for. That's success. They do the opposite of science. They were, scientists are the opposite of medicine. Medicine tries to save people's lives. All of these, microbes, et cetera. And they were trying to enhance the microbes to make them antibiotic resistant, to make them spread faster, to make them deadlier, et cetera. 1969, Nixon goes in there and shuts down the whole program. And everybody's shocked. And those guys were very angry. Now, here's what happens. And they're living in the basements of the Pentagon, and they're trying to bring this back. The CIA is secretly doing bioweapons. They leave Fort Detrick with all their cultures illegally, and they store them in these warehouses in New York. And they're trying constantly through the neocons, who become their allies, to revive the bioweapons program. Then 9/11 happens. And 9/11, the neocons bring off of the shelf the Patriot Act, which basically is the beginning of the surveillance state in our country. And nobody reads it. The only congressman to read it was my campaign manager, Dennis Kucinich. And he was in Congress at that time, and he told me not one copy was available to any congressman. The 350 Act that suddenly appeared the day after 9/11. And that dismantles basically the United States Constitution. Interestingly, that act, which nobody read, had a provision in it that revokes effectively the Geneva Convention and the Nixon's bioweapons charter. So all of so it basically relaunched the bioweapons arms race. There were two guys who were blocking it, Patrick Leahy and Tom Daschle. A week later, they're stopping it. They're not going to let it pass. A week later, they get envelopes filled with anthrax in their offices. Congress is shut down. They're shut up. And while Congress is shut down, the Patriot Act gets passed.
The letter had been thrown away, its origin unknown. Suddenly, federal investigators were thrust into the world of bioterrorism.
The second wave of attacks. 2 more anthrax-laced letters were mailed on October 9th, each sent to a Democratic senator. The return address was from Greendale School, later discovered to not exist, in Franklin Park, New Jersey. When intern Grant Leslie opened the letter addressed to Senator Tom Daschle on October 15th, white powder spilled onto her. It later tested positive for anthrax.
And the Patriot Act relaunched the arms race. So the military begins. And by the way, that anthrax, which was also used as the excuse for going into Iraq and invading Iraq because Saddam Hussein did it, we were told. It turns out after a 2-year investigation, the FBI came back and said that anthrax was Ames anthrax, highly sophisticated. There's only one place in the world it could have come from, Fort Detrick, which is the CIA Pentagon lab. So at that point, the Pentagon begins pumping a lot of money into bioweapons, about $2 billion a year, but they don't want to do it because they don't know if the Patriot Act is actually, legal. Because the Patriot Act, what it says is, we're not revoking the Geneva Convention, we're not invoking the bioweapons charter, but we're making a law that any federal official that violates those 2 bills cannot be prosecuted. So the treaties are still in place, but they give an exemption to all federal officials. The Pentagon's not sure that that's legal. And by the way, if you violate those provisions of Geneva, it's a death penalty. You get hanged. But they were worried about doing it. So they, instead of putting it in-house at the Pentagon, they put it all in NIH in Tony Fauci's shop. They give him a 68% raise, which is why he became the highest paid federal official in history. He was making more, $450,000 a year. The president only makes $400,000, but it's because of that military salary he got, the 68% raise in the military. So he had to do bioweapons development.
And it's amazing to me because Elon Musk bought Twitter, okay? They go into Twitter and they release all of the files where the government of America was colluding with the executives at Twitter to stomp down all the dissent on the vaccine and the COVID protocols. There were doctors losing their license trying to explain to you guys what was going on. There were doctors telling you, do not do this. This is not good for you. This is bad news bears. And they were being silenced and shut up. And now all the information has come out on Twitter. Elon Musk has released all of it. All of this communication where the government was stifling true information. And it seems like no one even cares. And the reason why I'm posting the video, this video particularly, because if no one even cares when the next one comes, if you thought the last one was bad, it'll be 10 times worse, 100 times worse. Okay? So it's time for everybody to do their homework, tell their friends. And in America, I can't speak for all you other folks out there because we have different stuff in America. We have the Constitution of the United States and we have the Bill of Rights where everything falls on. And it's up to us to make sure that that is the authority and not these two-faced, double-necked, lying politicians. Okay? That's what we want to make sure. They are treasonous cowards right before your very eyes every day. We'll talk about the border next. And they need to be held accountable. And it's going to be up to us and our collective voice to get louder and louder about the injustices of the next 3 years. Thanks for watching the video. I know it was a little long, but it had so much information in it. I didn't want to interrupt the video. I just wanted to provide all the information so you could wrap your head around it. All right, hit that thumbs up for information. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel if you're not, and we'll see you on the next video. And stay vigilant out there, because this party is not over.
Greatest perpetrator of misinformation during the pandemic has been the United States government. Misinformation that COVID was spread through surface transmission, that vaccinated immunity was far greater than natural immunity, that masks were effective. Now we have the definitive Cochrane review. What do you do with that review? Cochrane is the most authoritative evidence body in all of medicine and has been for decades. Do you just ignore it, not talk about it? That myocarditis was more common after the infection than the vaccine. Not true. It's 4 to 28 times more common after the vaccine. That young people benefit from a booster. Misinformation. Our two top experts on vaccines quit the FDA in protest over this particular issue, pushing boosters in young, healthy people. The data was never there. That's why the CDC never disclosed hospitalization rates among boosted Americans under age 50. The vaccine mandates would increase vaccination rates. The George Mason University study shows it didn't. Over and over again, we've seen something that goes far beyond using your best judgment with the information at hand. We've seen something which is unforgivable, and that is the weaponization of medical research itself. The CDC putting out their own shoddy studies, like their own study on natural immunity, looking at one state for 2 months, when they had data for years on all 50 states. Why did they only report that one sliver of data? Why did they salami slice the giant database? Because it gave them the result they wanted. Same with masking study. Well, the data has now caught up in giant systematic reviews, and the public health officials were intellectually dishonest. They lied to the American people. Thank you.
You are the unvaccinated. You are the problem. It is the unvaccinated who are the problem, period, end of story.
The only people that you can blame The only people you can blame, this isn't shaming, this is the truth. Maybe they should be shamed, are the unvaccinated.
It's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks.
Anyone you came into contact with will blame you, as will the rest of us who have done the right thing by getting vaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
I think it's time to get our moral house in order, Anderson. It's the unvaccinated who are the threat.
All of us vaccinated folks are going to start wearing masks to protect the unvaccinated folks. It's called a Christian value.